when I started, I started way back in the day. I was recording on like Ross 4x4s and things like that and tape decks. But once I started actually scoring films, I got Pro Tools. And I did everything in Pro Tools. I liked playing instruments live, so I didn't actually sequence music. I didn't like the sound of quantized, computerized, synthesized music. So what I do, I just record with no click or anything, just record with a mic, anything that I could play myself acoustically. I see that it is rather easy to find reproduced sounds of live instruments. The thing that I'm wary about with that is that I always feel that the human element is superior. And I find that with samples and things, they tend to polish off the rough edges and make it perfect. And also things in Pro Tools or Logic or whatever sequencing program I'm using to quantize everything and make them rhythmically perfect, it starts sounding inhuman. You can imagine trying to do that to some, like, Count Basie and, Thelonious Monk. And so if anything, I try to rail against the trend of synthesis in terms of reproducing acoustic sound. So if it's good, can be acoustic, I'd rather it remain acoustic. If it's supposed to be synthesized, great, but that's by design. How I use instruments is kind of a function of what I know how to play. But what I do in terms of expanding my horizons is that I tend to go and just buy instruments before I know how to play them. And then I throw them in the studio and I'll just tinker around until I can actually become adept at them to the point where I can record them. For instance, I pick up a guitar and if I start doing riffs, I tend to do things like that. It kind of makes sense to write rock songs with a guitar. It makes sense to write classical songs with a cello or a piano. And then rhythmic stuff like kind of that has beatbox-driven hip-hop elements or whatever, I actually sit down at the drum kit and record. And then I think the choice of the instrument of which you're going to write on matters. It sets up a vibe ahead of time. So my early scores were like me playing the drums and then jumping over the guitar and playing something bowed and then some piano and some vibraphone, whatever it was, that was kind of the sound of my early scores. It wasn't until later that I started conducting orchestras and merging the two worlds. So now, you have a film like Fast Five that utilizes kind of everything. I'm drumming on it, I'm playing guitar, and then we're recording full orchestra. And it's the same kind of writing process. I write themes first and then record into Pro Tools. And I love an analog front end. I love, old vintage consoles and preamps, and I like the analog into the digital and then manipulate in Pro Tools, and that's pretty much the process. The idea of studios have become a lot more accessible to people being able to build them in their living space. Mine is way too big to be directly in my living space because the studio is just kind of large. I used to have a studio inside my house. That was another house I had. It was cool, but the idea that I could never kind of escape it kind of wore on me after a few years. So the idea was like, I'll find a property where I can build two buildings. One's the house, have to put on the basketball court. And then dividing that is then the studio, and build the studio in. So I'm able to kind of commute by walking, and there's still separation, but at the same time, my hours are so terrible that at 4 or 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning, if I'm still working, it would be very hard for me to kind of drive across town without killing people by the dozens. So it's a good thing. The tone of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 is that it takes place, instead of in one region, it takes place all over the world, and it's kind of world on the brink is what they call it, So the music, instead of going with kind of mostly that macho, just rock thing, we're like, we have to go emotional on this. So I scored it as if this was kind of a Saving Private Ryan, but just modern. The score is much more orchestral and theme-based and kind of classic than one might expect from a Call of Duty franchise.
Missile strikes confirmed on multiple Russian hard targets in your AO. All primary threats neutralized. Good work, team. That's one for the books.
Easy day, Overlord. Sandman out.
Going for it in the music industry at all is a risky proposition. It's a tough road. You're talking about a world that's very different than it was pre-1998 or something like that. You have to find other ways of doing it other than relying on album sales. And for me, doing film music is a great way for a lot of people to get my music heard. I mean, really, the whole bottom line is it is about the music. The nature of kind of making your way through a competitive field that's impacted, it's like anything that a lot of people want to do. It's hard to make it into the NBA. It's hard to make it into screenwriting. The good thing about music is there's so many different avenues to go through. My whole team is made up from composers or musicians that started that way and then became maybe engineers or mixers or music editors or orchestrators. And so there's a lot of ways to go instead of just the path. But if you're passionate about it and you love it, you won't be able to sleep at night unless you actually give it a go.